I got dressed like I'd been invited. There was no email, no formal letter, but I ironed my blouse, put on the navy coat Grandma once said made me look honest, and wrapped her hummingbird handkerchief carefully around my wrist like I always did when I needed to feel her nearby. My apartment was quiet, as always. No kids calling from upstairs, no husband shuffling behind me with coffee. Just me. My mug half full, the heater humming, and the shadow of her voice echoing in my mind. I didn't care about the money. Not really. I just didn't want her to be rewritten. It took me about 15 minutes to walk to the law firm. The streets of Asheville this time of year had a softness to them, leaves curling under boots, air crisp but not biting. The building stood where it always had, ivy-covered brick, gold letters on the glass, Caraway Wren Law. Crossing the street, I caught my reflection in a car window, calm, composed, older than I remembered being. I was halfway to the door when a voice cut through. "Miss Reyna?" It didn't come from the office steps. It came from the side alley, low and gravelly. A man, disheveled, coat fraying at the sleeves, stood just outside the shade of the overhang. His face was familiar, but only in that way where you can't name the face, just the feeling it gives you. "I'm sorry," I said, already slowing. His eyes didn't waver. "The paper you'll hear is forged. She didn't want them to have it." I stood frozen. Before I could ask who sent him, why he knew my name, a security guard from the front door barked at him. "Move along, now!" The man stepped back, turned, and vanished between the buildings like smoke through a vent. The doorman smiled at me like nothing had happened. I nodded and pushed through the heavy doors. Reception smelled like lemon polish and old money. The receptionist didn't look up right away. When she did, I gave her my name. Reyna Caraway. "I'm here for the will reading." She scanned a printed list, brows narrowing slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name's not on the list." I let the silence hang. Before I could ask anything, the glass doors behind me opened, and in swept Dolores, my older sister. Her coat cost more than my rent. Her heels echoed with confidence. She had two cousins trailing behind her, and a smile like she belonged to everyone in the room. "Dolores," the receptionist beamed. "So good to see you." She walked up, gave the woman a light hug, then turned and noticed me. Our eyes met. I didn't say a word. She leaned in slightly and said, too sweetly for anyone else to hear, "Let's not make this difficult, Reyna. It's family only." I smiled back, the kind of smile that burns when you hold it too long. I stepped outside, sat down on the stone steps. Cold slipped through my coat, but I didn't move. I just gripped that handkerchief like it could keep me from disappearing. They wanted me invisible. I gave them every chance not to erase me, and they did it anyway. I sat there a while, watching people walk by, watching nothing, really. And I remembered things they wouldn't bring up in that room, things no lawyer would read. How I held Grandma's hand when her eyes couldn't track light anymore. How I blended her meals, wiped her chin, adjusted the pillows under her ankles because the pressure sores were getting bad. How I stayed when nobody else did. And then I thought about Dolores's last Facebook post. "Always been so close with Grandma," she wrote, under a filtered photo taken 5 years ago. 5 years. I remembered Grandma telling me once, when we were alone in that dim bedroom and the machines beeped too loud, "The ones who stay silent are the ones people fear most." Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of what my silence was worth. They shut me out. But that didn't mean I had to let the story end there. I stood up slowly, brushed off my coat. I didn't head home. I headed somewhere she'd still be. If the paper is forged, then the truth must still be somewhere. I didn't walk back in to argue. I walked in because walking away would have meant they'd won. The reception area was quieter now. Most of the guests had already been led into the main conference room. I stepped back inside, this time not expecting anyone to greet me. I kept my coat on and found an empty seat near the corner, by the potted ficus no one ever watered. I didn't fidget, didn't pull out my phone. I just sat there, present. The receptionist, the same one who'd turned me away earlier, avoided my gaze. A few cousins passed by me, eyes sliding over like I was scenery. One of them paused halfway to the door, leaned toward the man beside him, and whispered, not quite low enough, "Did they hire extra staff for today?" Then a man in a gray blazer, old enough to be my uncle, nodded at me kindly and said, "I didn't know the help was invited today." I gave him a smile, not wide, not sarcastic, just tight enough to carry the sting on the inside, where it counted. He walked past without waiting for a response, and I sat there, realizing for the first time that in their eyes, I didn't even belong enough to be insulted directly. The hallway beyond the main entrance curved softly to the right, leading toward the firm's heritage display, a wall of framed portraits and newspaper clippings celebrating generations of legacy. I wasn't planning to stop there, but something made my feet slow. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the weight in my chest needing an anchor. And then I saw it. A newly printed photo, blown up and mounted on canvas, hung in the center of the wall. The Caraway legacy was embossed at the bottom in gold. It was from a family reunion 5 years ago. I remembered that day because I was the one who took the picture. But in this version, my face wasn't there. I stepped closer, squinting, not out of doubt, but disbelief. I scanned the people in the shot. Dolores stood front and center, smiling wide like always. My brother Luther had his arm around our uncle. My mom was in the back row, half laughing. And where I should have been, just behind Luther's shoulder, there was space, just enough to know someone stood there once, just enough to know someone didn't want me seen anymore. I'd heard of families editing stories. I didn't expect them to literally crop me out of one. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a rewrite. Inside the room, people were already seated. I took a step forward, but not through the main door, just far enough to see Dolores in her element. She floated through the space like she owned it, smiles here, a gentle hand on someone's arm there. Her voice was always the right pitch, her eyes always met the right people. She caught my gaze for a split second, but didn't flinch. She didn't smirk, she just turned away. I found a seat near the window. It was colder there, and quieter. As I sat, an older woman in pearls approached and gave me a polite nod. You girls don't speak up like the others," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "Good staff is hard to find these days." My smile didn't move this time. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked off to chat with Dolores like we'd never exchanged words. Second time today. Second time someone assumed I was paid to be here. And honestly, it didn't even hurt the same anymore. It sat there, like a weight I'd been wearing without noticing. Familiar. I didn't correct her. What would have been the point? I just sat there, quiet, and thought to myself, maybe I'd served this family for so long I'd started to look like the furniture. A few minutes later, I walked into the hallway bathroom and locked the door behind me. The light buzzed overhead, too white, too harsh. I stared at my face in the mirror and finally said it out loud. "You don't belong here. And they know it." The reflection didn't flinch. My voice was steady, but the back of my throat ached. I thought of Grandma, her voice on nights when we were alone and I was the only one who sat through the quiet between medications. "When people try to make you invisible," she said once, "don't disappear. Make them see you without blinking." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the handkerchief, the one she gave me. The hummingbird still held its shape, even after years of being folded, tucked away. I wrapped it around my wrist, tighter this time, like a bandage, like armor. I didn't cry. My eyes burned, but nothing fell. I breathed through my nose, jaw clenched tight. I opened the door. Dolores's voice carried down the hallway, light and confident. "She always kept to herself," she was saying to someone. "Even Grandma said she didn't quite fit." I kept walking, not to fight, not yet, but to remember. I didn't walk back into that room because I believed anything would change. I walked back in because I needed to witness it. The conference room hadn't shifted. Same dimmed lighting, same wood polish clinging to old shelves and chairs like a badge. Nobody turned when I stepped inside. I stood near the wall, behind the last row of seats, beside a dusty bookshelf nobody had touched in years. Dolores sat near the head of the table, centered. Her blazer matched the crest behind her. Intentional or coincidental, who knew anymore? My mother was at her side, already sipping from the glass in front of her. Luther sat across from them, arms folded, eyes lowered. And then there was Rowan Griggs. Rowan had the kind of voice trained to sound expensive, slow enough to imply importance, warm enough to pretend he wasn't reading from something rehearsed. "We are gathered," he began, "to formally review the last will and testament of Eloise Marie Carraway." He read every name with precision. Cousins, nieces, donations to a museum, a scholarship fund, the flower club, the dog rescue she never once mentioned, and still no mention of mine. By the time he got to the phrase that cemented it, "The estate will be entrusted solely to Dolores Wren for executive handling," my palms had gone clammy, but my jaw held tight. It wasn't a clerical error. It was a decision. Dolores didn't gloat. She didn't even turn her head until Rowan finished. Then, like clockwork, she leaned forward with that calm PR smile and said, "Grandma wanted the family's legacy to be in safe hands." A few nods, polite applause, and in the middle of it all, I stood still, invisible in plain sight. As the conversation turned to brunch logistics and photo ops, I stepped toward the side of the room, near the window. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and texted Luther. "When did they finalize this version?" The three dots flickered for half a second, then vanished. No reply. I stared at the screen, then noticed a chat notification pop up on someone's phone across the room. Group chat, Carraway Legacy. I wasn't in that group. I never had been. Curious but composed, I approached my younger cousin, Megan. She looked up, startled. "Hey," I said gently. "Could you do me a favor? I think I accidentally left the Legacy group. Can I peek at the last few messages so I can catch up?" She handed over her phone without suspicion. I scrolled, and there it was. Discussions dating back months, venue options, who should be the spokesperson, how Rowan was a dream to work with. Photos of rehearsal dinners I never knew happened. A poll about floral arrangements. A message from Dolores, 6 weeks ago. "Once the revisions are locked in, let's finalize the press release." Not a single message ever mentioned me. I handed the phone back, smiled, and thanked her. She didn't see my hands tremble. Outside, the cold had crept in under my collar, but I barely felt it. They hadn't just left me out of the reading. They'd erased me from the planning, from the process, from the narrative. Back at home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone screen. I opened my text thread with Dolores. Empty, but for one message from 4 weeks ago. "Let me know the date of the reading." Read. No reply. I didn't need confirmation, but part of me still hoped it was all just incompetence, that someone forgot to loop me in. Hope is stupid like that. I opened my laptop. My grandmother had once given me access to her cloud documents, back when she was still lucid, still capable of remembering where she left her passwords. I searched for anything recent. And there it was. Final will, April draft. I opened it. My name sat under co-executor alongside Dolores's. There was a note at the bottom of the file. Revised. Requested by Dolores. Call Rowan to confirm. The timestamp matched the date my grandmother had started slipping in and out of coherence, the week she'd been prescribed stronger medication, the same week Dolores flew in for an extended stay. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't right. I didn't cry. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "They didn't steal the money. They stole the memory of who she really loved." I printed the draft, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer beside the handkerchief. I didn't go home after I found the will draft. Didn't take off my shoes or check the mail. I drove, straight, slow, no music. The kind of drive where you don't really think, you just let the road carry what your mind can't. Grandma's house sat at the far edge of town, where the sidewalk thinned and trees grew wild past fences. Nobody had touched it since the funeral. No one dared, or maybe no one cared. The key was still in my glove box, taped behind the owner's manual. She gave it to me months before she passed, said, "In case you ever need to come back when no one else wants you to." I let myself in. The air inside hit me before the light did. A mix of old lavender, used books, and the kind of stillness that clings when no one's been home. I stood in the foyer longer than I needed to, just letting my body adjust, letting something in me settle. Everything was where she left it. The little porcelain ducks on the windowsill. The crooked lamp no one fixed because she liked it that way. I passed through the hall slowly, trailing my hand across the wallpaper she chose herself back in '92. I opened the hallway closet. Her housecoat still hung there, folded like it had been placed by someone who didn't want to disturb it, but also didn't want it to be forgotten. I pulled it out. As I did, a notebook fell. Thin, worn, spine bent. I crouched and picked it up. No label, just hers, her handwriting. Slanted cursive that always sloped left like it was leaning toward you. She'd written on nearly every page. Some were grocery lists, names of songs, pages from a novel she never finished. And then, lists of memories, thoughts about each grandchild. Most entries were short, 1 or 2 lines. Mine was 4 pages. She wrote about the time I stayed up with her when her cough kept her from sleeping, about the way I stirred tea 3 times before drinking, about how she used to listen to me hum without realizing I did it. She wrote, "People don't remember who stood beside them in the storm, just who posed in the sun." And then, Reyna always saw the quiet parts of people, the parts they didn't think anyone noticed. She saw mine. I paused at the last page. It ended mid-sentence. If she ever needs to know the truth, she should. That was it. Not torn, not smudged, just unfinished. I stared at the words, waiting for them to finish themselves. The robe was still in my hands. I turned it over. Inside the collar, hand-stitched with fading thread, was a hummingbird. Same shape as the one on the handkerchief in my coat pocket. Same lines. Same wings mid-flight, tucked into a place only someone close would ever see. She made it herself. I remembered the night she first showed me. I was 17. We sat in the kitchen while the power was out from a storm, and she said, "If no one sees you, stitch your story into something that lasts." I'd thought she meant poetry. I slid my hands into the robe's pockets. One held nothing. The other held a receipt. Old, faded, folded 3 times. A print shop in town, labeled Will Revisions, USB copy. The date was from 2 months before she died, back when she still signed her own name without trembling. I left the house with the robe in my arms and the notebook tucked into my bag. The sun had started to dip, but the sky was still holding on to daylight. I drove straight to the address on the receipt. No detours, no stops. It was a storefront I'd passed 1,000 times without noticing. Dust-covered windows. A faded open sign barely clinging to life. It was closed. Figures. I peeked through the glass, saw old machines, papers piled like snowdrifts, a blinking computer monitor. I called the number listed under the shop name. Voicemail. I left a message, steady and clear. "This is Reyna Caraway. I believe you printed something for my grandmother in her final months. I'd like to speak with you. I'll come back in the morning." I sat back in my car. The robe rested on the passenger seat like a folded memory. The notebook sat in my lap. I ran my hand across the last page again. If she ever needs to know the truth, she should. I whispered it out loud. And then in my head, I heard the rest. Look where I stitched it. She never left anything to chance. Not her love, not her words, not me. It was just past 8 when I drove back into the older part of town. That part of Asheville that used to matter once, before the high-end condos and the artisanal coffee shops took over the good sidewalks. Here, the streetlights buzzed without promise, and the storefronts looked like memories that hadn't aged well. I parked near the old Methodist church. Soup night. You could smell it before you stepped out of the car. Stale beans, wet coats, tired bodies waiting for something hot that wouldn't last long. He was there. Same coat, same eyes. He stood near the corner of the food line, quiet, arms folded like a man waiting for something more important than a meal. I got out and approached slowly, not with fear, but with the same kind of caution you use when approaching something that's been broken before. He saw me. Didn't blink. "You came back." "I told you I would," I said. He nodded, then added, almost like a confession, "Didn't think you would." Most folks forget people like me. I didn't say anything. You asked for a name earlier, he continued. Eldon. Eldon Van. The name hit me like an old photograph pulled from a drawer, familiar but out of place. I used to write for your grandmother, legal stuff, advice, before they decided I was too old to matter. I sat down beside him on the edge of the concrete bench. Didn't ask permission, didn't offer a smile. He kept talking, but softer now. I was with her for nearly 20 years. She trusted me. Until your sister brought in that new guy, Rowan, fast talker, clean jawline, quick with a pen, never questioned a thing. She said she didn't trust how things were changing, I muttered. Eldon looked at me, eyes narrowing just slightly. She trusted you. Told me you were the only one who listened without trying to rewrite what she meant. I let that land. Let it sit with the ache that had been following me all week. I was told not to talk, he said. Dolores made it clear, said it'd look like I was bitter, a liability. He reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out an envelope, weathered and yellowed at the corners, held it out with both hands like it might shatter if handed wrong. I kept this dry for a reason, he said. Some things deserve to be remembered. I didn't take it right away, but when I did, it felt heavier than it looked. I thanked him. He nodded, and we sat there a while longer, not speaking, just watching the soup line shuffle forward. Later, back in my car, I didn't drive off. I let the heat run and the windows fog up. The envelope sat in my lap. And then something surfaced. Not from the past few days, but from when I was 12. Grandma had been in the hospital for a bad infection. I sat at her bedside with a book. She reached over, brushed her sleeve back, and showed me the underside of her wrist. A hummingbird, tattooed in soft ink, almost faded from times. They told me it was foolish, she'd said, but I needed to mark what I loved. She never showed it to anyone else. I asked why, and she just smiled. Some things are meant to be kept, not displayed. Back then, I didn't understand. Now, with the handkerchief in my coat pocket, the robe folded in my back seat, and Eldon's envelope resting in my hand, I did. The hummingbirds weren't decorations. They were her signature, and no one else in the family even knew she had that tattoo. You were always trying to speak, I whispered. We just weren't listening. I parked in front of a 24-hour diner a few blocks down. Took a deep breath. Turned off the engine. Opened the envelope under the dashboard light. There was a letter, printed on thick paper, the kind she used when she meant what she wrote. To whom it may matter, it began. Not dear family, not to my children. To whom it may matter. She wrote of her fears, of how Dolores had been pressuring her for updates, of how the medication made her feel slow, distant, of how she worried the revisions weren't hers anymore. She asked that I not be left out, that my role as caregiver not be dismissed as proximity, that my silence not be mistaken for irrelevance. Attached behind the letter was a copy of an older will. My name listed as co-executor, not secondary, equal. I didn't feel joy, didn't feel rage. What I felt was simpler. She remembered. Even if no one else would admit it, she did. The next morning, the air was all performance. Blue sky, garden trimmed, cameras framed with ivy like they'd been choreographed. Dolores had transformed her home into a staged memory. A brunch billed as a celebration of legacy. That word again, legacy. I arrived at 10:30 sharp. I wasn't late. I wasn't early. Just present, as usual. A valet took my keys and offered a practiced smile. Inside, guests floated from room to room with champagne and small plates, as if grief were something you catered. Photos lined the walls, old ones mostly, but none recent enough to include the person who sat with Grandma in her final months. I passed by a quote printed on parchment under glass. Time remembers those who plant truth. I wrote that, gave it to Grandma 2 Christmases ago. No credit. I nodded to the woman beside me, who blinked like she'd never seen me before. Dolores worked the crowd like she was born for it. Chin tilted, words smooth. Even her grief was curated. Marjorie sat at the head table, flanked by cousins, correcting the arrangement of silverware like it mattered more than anyone missing from the room. I moved quietly along the edge of the room, not hiding, just observing. Then came the moment. Someone, maybe a second cousin, began distributing boxes. "Keepsakes from Grandma," they said. I waited and watched. They handed Dolores a small velvet box. She opened it slowly, dramatically. Inside was a silver brooch, hummingbird wings mid-flight. I knew it like I knew my own name. Dolores held it up. "She wore this to every garden party. I'll treasure it." I felt my stomach shift, not with anger, with history. 2 years ago, Grandma wrapped that brooch in a napkin, the same hummingbird handkerchief I still carried, and whispered, "For when they forget to see you." She meant me. I didn't say a word. I turned and stepped out onto the back porch, cold air hitting my chest like a wall. I stood there, watching trees move but not sway, trying to breathe past it. Mom followed a few minutes later. She shut the door behind her and didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, "This isn't your fight, Reyna. Let the past settle." I turned to face her. "The past doesn't settle when people keep rewriting it." She sighed. That tired, empty kind of sigh people give when they're too guilty to argue and too proud to apologize. We stood in silence. I waited for her to say something more. She didn't. And that was the moment I understood. She never believed I'd have the strength to stand up to Dolores. Not once. Not in all these years. Not when Grandma got sick. Not when the calls stopped. Not even now. To her, I was reliable background noise. She thinks silence is my only currency, I thought. But that currency was bankrupt. I left without saying goodbye. By the time I made it home, the sun had slid behind the trees, and the mailbox was stuffed with flyers and bills. I pulled everything out, sorted without thinking, then paused. An envelope from First Allegiance Bank. Inside, a notification. Courtesy only. The account had been closed. My name had been listed as joint owner. Her name, Grandma's, beside mine. I hadn't even known it existed. I called the number. Waited on hold. A man with a calm voice confirmed it had been closed 2 weeks after her passing. Funds transferred to another account. Dolores's. I hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat at the edge of my bed with the letter in my lap and whispered, "They didn't just rewrite me out of the will. They swept the ink before it dried." The following afternoon, I sat on my couch, legs curled under me, the USB drive from Eldon balanced in my palm like it might detonate. I'd stared at it all morning, pacing the apartment, folding and unfolding the robe, rereading the notebook pages like they were a map. But it all circled back to this flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop. There were a few folders, legal files, scanned letters, drafts labeled with months. Then one video file, just 3 words in the title, "For her." I clicked. The screen flickered, and then her face. Not from months ago in a hospital bed, not blurred by time. She sat upright in her reading chair, glasses perched low, hair pulled back the way she always liked it, tight and practical. "If Reyna's watching this," she began, voice soft but clear, "then you already know something went wrong." I didn't breathe, just watched. I was rushed, not by time but by pressure. Too many papers, too many questions I didn't ask because they came from my own. They want to protect something, but I'm afraid it's not the legacy I built. It's the one they've chosen to rewrite. She paused, folded her hands. "Reyna, you were always quiet, but never absent. That mattered more to me than titles or money. I know this family. They talk loud to drown out what they don't want to face. Don't let them tell you silence means you don't belong." She looked away, then back. "You were there when no one else was, and I see you still are." That was it. No dramatic ending, no tearful goodbye. Just truth. I sat for a long time after it ended, staring at the frozen frame of her face. Not angry, not sad, steady, like she knew this moment would come. Later, I went digging through a few boxes in my closet. Things I hadn't touched since the funeral. Mismatched scarves, old photo albums, a paperback I'd meant to finish months ago. Tucked between pages was an envelope, thick cream paper with my name written in her handwriting. Inside was a letter, short, direct. If they try to talk over you, remember what I always said, you don't need to shout to be heard. It was dated 3 weeks before she passed. She mentioned the brooch, mentioned a document I never received. And now, holding the USB and that envelope together, it wasn't just neglect I saw, it was control. Not letting a letter get delivered. That's not forgetfulness, it's intention, it's orchestration, it's family. I folded the letter, placed it beside the notebook and the flash drive, and got in the car. I drove to a little cafe just off Hendersonville Road. Quiet. Locals only. I texted Cressida. She was already there. We hadn't spoken in over a year until 2 nights ago when I sent her a single message. I need to talk to someone who knows what evidence means. She had always been that kind of friend. Unsentimental. Sharp. I showed her the files, the letter, the will draft, and the banking document. She connected her own laptop, checked the metadata on the video. Recorded 11 days before she died, she said. This file hasn't been touched since. Whoever says it's fake is bluffing. She sat back, arms folded. This isn't a family feud anymore. It's fraud. Planned. Structured. You don't accidentally erase a will, or a bank account, or a person. I know, I said. So what's next? Lawsuit? I shook my head. They'd drag it out, spin it, say I was bitter, say she was confused. Instead, I had something better. I'm going to hold a meeting, I said. Where? At their event, the one next week, for the Caraway Legacy Foundation. Cressida blinked, smiled. You're going to use their stage. I nodded. I'm not crashing anything. I'm confirming everything. Later that night, I sat in my living room, surrounded by papers, cables, printouts, and 2 mugs of tea I never touched. I wrote out every fact I could prove, every date, every file, every quote. Then I made a second list. Things I suspected but couldn't yet prove. Things still missing. Could I take it to the press? Yes. Could I call a lawyer? Yes. But something in me said, wait. Grandma's words rang again. Truth lands hardest when it arrives quietly. I packed everything in a small case, taped the letter to the inside cover, slipped the handkerchief back around my wrist, not as a decoration, but as a declaration. They built a table and left me out. I wouldn't beg for a seat. I'd walk in with my own. The ballroom smelled like fresh flowers and polished reputation. I walked in through the side entrance, not sneaking, just not part of the grand design. The Caraway Family Foundation banner hung from the ceiling in gold script, flanked by enlarged photographs of Grandma. The quote boards were everywhere, her words, but dressed up, cropped, and credited in ways that made them fit Dolores's narrative. None of the photos had me in them. I walked past the display table slowly. One frame caught my eye, a silver brooch, shaped like a hummingbird, sitting in a glass case labeled Eloise's Gift to Dolores. I stopped, didn't touch it, didn't need to. The lie spoke loud enough without help. Dolores was front and center, as expected. Handshakes, posed smiles, that voice she used when she was being watched. She was giving a speech when I stepped into full view. She paused when she saw me. Her jaw didn't tighten. Her smile didn't drop. She was too practiced for that. She just blinked, then continued talking about preserving values, protecting memory, and building a legacy worth repeating. I moved through the crowd, calm, quiet. No one stopped me. Some nodded out of courtesy, not recognition. I found Rowan Griggs near the catering line, sipping red wine like it was juice. "Rowan," I said. He turned, lips parting for some canned line, but he saw my face, and whatever he meant to say, he swallowed. I handed him the folder. He opened it. 1 page in, his grip changed. Page 2, his jaw tensed. Page 3, he looked up. "You knew this version existed," I said. "You chose not to ask where it went." He hesitated. "There were conflicting instructions. Now you'll sit down," I said, just loud enough for a few heads to turn. And you'll listen. It wasn't the volume, it was the timing, the weight behind it. Something about the way I said it made the room still. Cressida caught my eye from the AV booth and gave the signal. I nodded. The lights dimmed, the projector flipped on. Grandma's face filled the screen. Her voice cut through the silence like a razor made of grace. If Reyna's watching this, and if the rest of you are too, then I wasn't wrong about who'd be forgotten. She looked right into the lens. I asked for certain things. I meant them. I said no to some changes, and they kept pushing. If this gets out, and I'm not here to explain myself, then let this be enough. Reyna didn't need to ask for acknowledgement. She earned it. The screen went black. No music, no applause, nothing. Dolores opened her mouth, but I stepped forward first. My shoes made the only sound in the room. If she didn't trust me, I said, looking at Dolores, why did she put me next to her name? No one answered. Rowan turned away from the display. Marjorie stared down at her lap. A few guests began to quietly slip toward the exits, uncertain, uncomfortable. Dolores looked at me like she wanted to speak, but her throat betrayed her. I walked to the front table. No microphone, no speech, just the original will, laid flat. And then, from my coat pocket, the handkerchief. I unfolded it slowly, placed it over the will, the hummingbird stitched on the corner facing the crowd. Not as a gesture, as a signature. I took one last glance at the wall of portraits. Still no picture of me. But now they knew why. And I didn't need to be hung on their wall to be remembered. I woke up before the sun had fully stretched across the blinds. No alarms, no sound but the faint groan of old pipes kicking in heat. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug like it was holding me back together. No texts, no calls, not even Luther. I didn't expect a parade. But the quiet was heavier than usual. I sat by the window and stared at the world outside like it owed me an answer. It didn't give one, but my inbox did. Half a dozen emails, one from someone at the event saying, "I'm sorry." Another saying I was brave. One that asked if the video was real, and one from an anonymous sender with a headline attached, "Video emerges challenging Caraway estate control." I clicked. Just a few quotes from Grandma's recording, typed out with no context. It was spreading, not loud, not viral, but like ink on linen, slow, permanent. The family name wasn't ruined, just dented enough to show the cracks that had always been there. I didn't answer any of the messages. I didn't plan to, because the truth didn't end the story. It interrupted theirs. Around 10, another email arrived, from Rowan Griggs, a formal notice. A meeting was being scheduled, to address the original will, to discuss the legality of the revisions, and, perhaps, a criminal inquiry. Dolores had hired a new PR firm. No surprise. Marjorie had gone silent. No comment, no appearance. Just silence now that hers couldn't cover mine. I sat with the notice for a while, thought about going forward with charges. There were grounds, fraud, coercion, maybe even tampering. But something in me had already decided. What I needed most wasn't punishment, it was visibility. I wrote back, requested reinstatement as co-executor of the estate, requested full access to the foundation Grandma originally designed, one that Dolores had twisted into something performative. No drama, no speeches, just a reclaiming. A few days later, I returned to Grandma's house. One last time. The key still worked. No one had changed the lock. The air inside hadn't shifted. It smelled like it always did. Lavender and old carpet, stale tea in the cabinet, and the ghost of her laughter tucked behind doors left cracked. I didn't take much, just a few books, one of her cardigans, and the chair she used to read in, the fabric on the arms still faded from her palms. In the reading room, I hung the hummingbird handkerchief. Framed it, didn't center it, just nailed it in, raw and visible. On the note beneath, I wrote, "She remembered." It wasn't meant to be a statement, just something for the room to hold. I stood in the doorway longer than I planned to, letting the quiet settle into my bones. Then I locked up, dropped the key back under the porch rock. No ceremony, no final goodbye. Just enough. I drove west. No plan, just direction. I wasn't running. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing. The nonprofit would take shape in time. It would be quiet, built for people who sat beside beds and got written out of stories anyway. People who knew what it meant to show up when no one else did, and to leave with nothing but the truth in their hands. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, didn't need their permission. They'd made it clear I was never really part of the version of family they'd chosen to display. But Grandma had always known, and now, so did everyone else. Family is where truth lives. And sometimes to find it, you have to stop knocking on the wrong door.